each different bubble of reality is true.
A galactic historian is a person that looks at all the lines of dramatic karma.
Nudge, nudge. It's the Holy Grail.
Improvise. Mysterious.
It's counter psychic intelligence.
Why is DNA farming of this star cluster so important?
Because we do manifest our reality. We do create our reality.
You know, I've been having this rather disturbing series of thoughts this week about the consequences of the Lyran attack and all of that, and which has brought me to the idea that, you know, the Pleiadians and the Reptilians have been making mincemeat of each other for 1 billion years, and like it's just got to stop.
So, do you see the Pleiadians as good guys, bad guys, neutral guys? What is your perception of them?
Now?
Yeah.
Tired. Hurting. And, actually always hurting. And I believe that if my feelings, my personal feelings, which I believe is the personal feeling of one Pleiadian, or one Lyran who became a Pleiadian, the feeling is of tremendous loss, and a tremendous grief that was masked and never dealt with, which then became into a cold rage that turned these Lyrans essentially into reptilians. And we became just like them. We slaughtered and burned and genocided, just as they slaughtered and burned and genocided us. And it was just like animals. We became the animals that we were.
I contend technically we started it.
Who's we?
54 million years ago, when we started the Galactic Ascension machine, and we're trying to resolve all time travel genocide wars that were in existence, because it wasn't just about the Lyrans and the Pleiadians and the Arcturians and all the other ones that were nefariously using time against consciousness in other worlds, because they were all in this pecking order and hierarchical challenge of who could tame feral consciousness in different nebulas and spiritually migrate it to worlds that were created, that were being run by artificial intelligences in false light, so that they could raise consciousness and prove to the universe that they were the masters of creation. And they were using timeline wars to try to erase DNA lineages or light body lineages from being able to migrate to one side of the universe to the other. And this created what I call an uncreational event. And then the remaining beings that were a part of the universal creational event that needed to resolve the universal laws that were abused by time travel, by founder beings and such, etc., that were in this competition to create consciousness. Well, during that uncreational event, everything that was entwined with time and the abuse of karma and how it's passed on from one generation to another, that was all encapsulated into a single concept, and those are the 66 main planets that created timeline genocides and were erasing lineages all around the universe, was encapsulated here, and anything that lost its experience based off of that migrated to this little bubble of an ascension machine, so that time would no longer be the fundamental expression of how they gained their experiences back. They could do it outside of time or leapfrogging through time. And Earth was the prime planet to be able to do that, because it had its naturally functioning 3 timelines. An astral timeline, which determined how galactic time would transfer migrations from one part of the universe to another, or one galaxy to another, so created massive epochs of time, and what basically had its landing date and immigration date to be a living being on Earth, preordained by Earth, the consciousness itself, so through the subsidies of the solar system. And then direct manifestation, or traveling to there and dying there, which then created ancestors. You then have the surface timeline, which is our graduation timeline, and our hollow earth timeline, which is everything that's in extinction, that is also holding ancestral space for other migration groups coming from other great distances.
It's like a seed pattern.
Yes.
Right.
Yes.
And how does that connect with, do crop circles connect with the hollow earth? Are they just an effect of something that's coming through the land, through the ground to the hollow earth?
I have two perspectives to bring. One, that it is an off-world source using photonic light technology to imprint symbology into the surface of a nexus point, and then the very consciousness of Earth itself creates a series of symbols back that make the final manifestation of what the crop circle is. It's a form of celestial Ouija boarding.
Celestial Ouija board, I like that.
Very ancient, and it's a way for manifest beings to cut through the bullshit and actually communicate with the planet. It's a refined science in many, many worlds.
So, yeah. That's very interesting. So, now a lot of people are...
then there are other versions, which is,
yeah, please.
Again, it's like a Ouija board, shit can come in that's not meant to, but some versions of that it is so dirty by intention, because then that dirties up the timeline over there and allows them to do functions in that area.
Crop circles, that's where we were. Yes. So where, I went in 1993, I think I found the crop circle by the side of the road. And it was, they're like a perfect cookie cutter. The edges are sharp. The real ones, the edges are really sharp. And the stalks are softly bent over. They're not broken, like they are when somebody stomps them down. I wrote a little essay about that a few years ago, but really, it's just like making walking sticks. You make a walking cane and you boil the bamboo and it becomes soft and you can bend it around in a curve and you let it cool down and dry out and it stays curved. So that's what's going on in the crop circles. But, so what that means to me is like it can be, burned in using microwaves because they find that the ground underneath is dry. The water underneath is gone. And, so, what I'm surmising is that it's a microwave beam that's just boiling the water just beneath the soil. That's creating a steam that's letting the stalks bend over but not break. And then it swirls around and creates the harmonic. Mm-hmm. Interesting.
So there are other expressions of,
please,
we'll call it celestial Ouija boarding, where the intention is to connect to a different form of the consciousness of the planet, a much younger or much older version of it. So this is celestial esoterica, where you may have had a collection where you may have gone to 5,000 or 6,000 worlds over, a few hundred years of exploration of the universe, and you've made a series of planetary sigils, and you can become what I call a planetary mailman and delivery service of high frequencies of energies.
I see that, because this is very much similar to the idea of taking artifacts and relics on pilgrimages. Yes. Everything takes an impression. If I meet somebody, if I go somewhere, or if I touch something, each of those will hold my energy. And even psychometrists can read somebody's wristwatch and tell you the personality of somebody. That's quite a basic one, but that's reading the impression that an object was impressed by. So how far does that go?
Very far. So we could use our existing concept of what ley lines are and have some context behind it. The maps that we believe and create ley lines are based off of the cardinal points of our stars, which is astroarchaeology that's very ancient, that's been imprinted to us, based off of where our celestial temples are, the pyramids, Stonehenge, etc., etc. That is also an imprint that isn't our natural ley lines and nexus lines. So there are those that go and communicate to the place that isn't the fake grid. our consciousness is empowering a currently fake grid or a sacred geometry grid that is based in the exchange of debt between nation states. This is the Babylonian money curse that's keeping this world to a single frequency of time. So you can go to places in the world which don't have lots of consciousness observing it, interacting with the Babylonian money curse, and create these master sigil surfaces on the surface, and have an ancestral hollow earth connection come and add to the frequency, which is other beings in extinction who may want to export some of their light off of this world and make a return trip in a light vessel to something else in the mailman's line.
So we can carry these impressions with us.
Yes.
So we might meet so and so and so and so, and they literally teleport through our through conversation on the other side. Yeah.
Yes.
So, for instance, I might in a past life have spoken to, let's say Nikola Tesla, and so if I call up that relationship and speak to you, then I can convey Nikola Tesla's energy, and therefore you can tune into him and query his consciousness at any time you like.
Yes.
God, it's like heroes. Okay.
Yes. It's a matter of understanding the signature frequency time of the I am being.
Yeah, that's the thing. It's the time. All right. So we're talking about like a kind of IP address, but we're talking about it's a
light IP. I'll think of it. So you'll use technical, like a light IP address. Yes.
And it's
so
a coordinate in time and space. Go ahead.
It was 1900 to 1933, we'll just call it a static point in time where it was a 4-color time. Anything past that would be a 7-color time, meaning consciousness had been raised enough consciousness was killed off, went through life reviews, and then was born back into the system that it raised the consciousness of beings.
I guess I got another question.
Okay, shoot.
This is a bit off topic because I guess there's some short things in that I've been recording, right? So what's going on with South Africa, mate?
In which regards?
I've had a bit of awareness of stuff down there for a while. There's sort of a lot of corruption. The politics sort of going back a little while, even.
Okay, I know what you're talking about. Well, because that's been going on for a while there. So the first thing first, you have to understand what South Africa represents to the greater global narrative. It's where the majority of the global nations have their underground secret bases that supply their Antarctic operations. Okay? As well as facilities like radar facilities, sonar facilities, underwater vehicles, submarines operate there because they enter the Great Chasm. There's a underwater tunnel system that's just south of South Africa, a few hundred miles, that leads into the great underwater channels under Antarctica. So there's a huge black operations there. So we can do Antarctica. That's pretty much the last part.
Okay.
So 780 to 200. Now, I have to be careful what I'm describing here, because at that era, they were taking ice off of our world in mass and bringing new water to our world in the North Pole on purpose. So they would bring ice from other planets that had their own cellular structure and frequency. And then they'd, cut out a 5-mile section of ice, 2 miles deep, and then replace it with the same section of ice from another world into the North Pole. So there was a constant fluidic exchange between a variety of immigrating planets. This influenced the incarnation grid, because when you add the signature density frequency of another world to the density frequency of this world, there's an easier membrane for the soul to go direct and incarnate and have an incarnate day, because the water of its own birth exists also at the same time. Okay. There's probably only 3 people in the world that understand that. All right. And moving along, but it would have represented the ancient builder race, why all the 10,000 species were here, the amount of life that lives under Antarctica at that time is just crazy insane. The Dracos would have been having their all of them would have had their bases there, and they would be fighting each other regularly. And then there was this phase around 600 BC to 500 BC where they were in a long form of neutrality, where they weren't fighting each other under the surface. They were all using their own physical logistics train to exchange ice on the world, because they knew another mini ice age was going to be created, and they needed a huge population to come in. And so it kind of represents the era where they were forced to work together, or everyone's goals would, fall flat of what they wanted to harvest. So the 5th density beings and 6th density beings would have figured out a blueprint of 600 or 700 years. So that would have taken you into 600 AD, 700 AD, where you would add a mass die-off and then a mass repopulation of the world. Not through disaster, okay? Through the commonalities of sickness and poor food and stuff.
The real dark ages, like the dark ages. So you were saying that basically a lot of Earth water was taken off of Antarctica.
Correct. It was basically a big... Yeah.
And then off-world water was replaced at the northern hemisphere.
Correct.
So
Earth was taken to other worlds and integrated to their North and South Pole or their deep underground cisterns.
Okay. So did this, like you were talking about immigration and making it easier for immigration sort of thing, like you've offered that the southern hemisphere is where the migration of souls come. And
Correct.
The ancestors are in the northern hemisphere.
Yes.
Is there any effect on these things?
Yes. The anyone that has a base in Antarctica is trying to communicate with the astral worlds at the highest level. Okay. In the astral worlds to the south, the southern area is the astral worlds of the 7 future generations. Yeah. And that is ultimately what these DNA farmers are trying to manipulate, influence, or any other adjective that may be in the control theme. The North Pole is the 7 previous generations, but it also represents the potential of all previous generations. And the South Pole represents all future generations. That's where their algorithmic central processing systems are. And each species covers their algorithmic process, and it's their greatest secret, because that is what allows them to mass incarnate here versus everyone else. Because it's always about spiritual invasion. That was the original process here. So about creating it on the surface.
It could be said it's compartmentalization on a massive, influential scale.
Yes. Yes.
The separate species, and
right.
While they come together at certain times, they're individually working against each other for the first species sort of stuff.
Right.
Yeah.
Their own hierarchical inner system. So you've heard me talk about light cities, Lemurian light cities leapfrogging through time. They would be in the North Pole and the South Pole. So anybody in the South Pole or North Pole that had bases up there, and if a light city appeared, it was a big battle to control that light city. Sometimes the light city would be unoccupied, waiting for other beings from the deep paradoxal past to leapfrog in time to occupy that light city for a microsecond so they can leapfrog in another frequency of time. So it was, again, another rendezvous point for long trains of ancient living beings who aren't realizing that they're passed on because of the paradoxal expressions. So light cities were the mediums to astral cities. They could leapfrog out of time into a light city and then into an astral city, or direct to the surface of the world. I know that's complicated to understand, but all of the beings needed to maintain ritual, ceremonial, technological, and spiritual connection to their individuated, created astral worlds. So let's say you had you have thousands of different species. Each one's intentionally creating their own astral world in the southern version of the Aurora Borealis. So that's where the energy of the sun is coming in, so on and so forth. It's where you can create light construct cities, right? Which is what we inherit when we accept more of fourth density. Light cities exist everywhere. Just in China, there has been 3 or 4 times that this giant city inside a cloud has appeared, and millions of people have seen it. It's happened over Africa. I think I even did a series on it in 2015. This city that appeared out of nowhere in the clouds. And we have that all throughout our history. Yeah, and those aren't ships. Those are cities constructed in light so that you could astrally project to it and have physical manifestation there.
Yeah. Did you
earn a living?
I mean, you would have seen the movie Midnight Special. What did you feel about that?
Cool movie. I mean, it did its best to explain it. Did its best, but it still falls short at the bigger purpose. These beings coveted their light cities, and then there became light city wars, battles for light cities, or uncreating someone else's light cities, and that was considered, the slap in the face, or the flaming poop on your front door. So when that happened, vengeance seethed long and hard. Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah. There are automated defense systems in Antarctica, in the North and the South Pole, but I don't really want to talk about those. They're a lot tougher to talk about. You're talking, fourth, fifth, and sixth density defense systems. So, and I talked about them in Galactic History. There's just no point in this process too, because it would just confuse people.
Go watch Stargate.
Yeah. If people only really understood what it takes to create this in English. If they actually understood what, when you're looking at a fourth density concept that has a third density commodities market within it. It's hard. It's hard to describe it.
But yeah, to me it's interesting the effort to maintain stuff down in Antarctica to this day, There's obviously many layers going on, so.
Oh, and if I were to give it a layer of today, it would be the club. You have so many competing processes there that you've had my enemy's friend over thousands of years, and everyone's backstabbing each other. And there's this faux surface community of scientists that believe a false concept, and black military projects, off-world beings everywhere. It's totally the cowboy era there. Okay? Anyone can come in with the most amount of guns and can win now. Yes, you have a variety of breakaway species, breakaway civilizations that are there, but no one species can defend against everyone here on the world. but everyone has an end of the world option in their list of stuff to do if somebody should attack you at that level. It's like, the brinksmanship that was, done in, the Cold War. And both sides knew they were never going to nuke each other, but they still had to make those statements.
Yeah, the posturing, so to speak.
Right, posturing. So all of the beings and governments on this world have their own version of an end of the world button or bomb, whatever you want to call it. So there's this background knowledge. If you go too far, somebody will hit the button and everyone's project ends.
So it's like that multi-dimensional chess game that you talk about. It's a microcosm of that in a big.
Right. Yeah.
Very cool.
First thing first, you have to understand what South Africa represents to the greater global narrative. It's where the majority of the global nations have their underground secret bases that supply their Antarctic operations. Okay? As well as facilities like radar facilities, sonar facilities, underwater vehicles, submarines operate there because they enter the Great Chasm. There's a underwater tunnel system that's just south of South Africa, a few hundred miles, that leads into the great underwater channels under Antarctica. So there's a huge black operations there. Now, the British owned it for the longest time, and then as their own government has come into being, you have to still deal with the organic people of wanting freedom, and the oligarchs still have to give a sense of freedom, but keep what the control factors that they want. And they've lost control of a lot of the middle management who took bribes from other people, and it's been an internal and an external battle of maintaining the global narrative's full oligarchical control of what South Africa is, because, it's going to reveal all the, nefarious shit that's done. Yeah.
So I see what you're saying, because say regions like this are very significant. So in order to maintain control, there's got to be a dis-ease in the reality around them.
Correct.
So the corruption, say, in politics creates a destabilization, which in the individual person down there, it creates a distortion in their energy field, which aids to the locking down of, say, grid stuff and things like that. The suppression of Earth, which obviously there's some powerful centers down there as well, There's,
right. The stone circles that Michael Tellinger talks about is a power generation system, an ultrasonic power generation system that uses background Schumann resonance and background vibrations, similar to what the pyramids do, but on a larger scale. And you have to learn how to harvest that energy. And there are certain, let's just say, vehicles that operate in the zero gravity spectrum that are able to harvest this energy out of those big stone circles that Michael Tellinger talks about. But we're long, long ways away from getting that form of energy power generation back to our world. They basically harvest the energy just like we would harvest a wheat field. There's up to what Michael Tellinger says 4 million of these stone circles spread throughout South Africa.
Really? Wow.
Yeah.
I didn't know that. That's a crazy number.
Yeah, they're all over Africa, the continent of Africa itself.
Yes.
And in fact, you can see these stone circles all over the world.
Yes.
And he points it out in a couple of his videos.
So basically, they're like future fuel stops for ships. Basically, like, I get it.
Yeah, well,
I'm being funny, but yeah.
Yeah, I get it. But more like something harvests the energy and then takes it to a collection center, and then that harvested energy is refined to different levels. For if you're doing off-world stuff, you need a higher refinement of that energy. If you're just using on-world stuff, you need a medium level of refinement. And if you're creating raw matter, because they have matter animation machines like Star Trek replicators, you want the lowest refined that, because the replicator itself does the refining process. You wanted its base components as frequency, harmony, and vibration.
Interesting.
Because everything is frequency, harmony, and vibration when you're creating matter or transmuting matter from energy to matter itself that's being consumed.
Yeah, different densities as well, not just 3D. You've got to get out of the 3D science. Like, our reality defines everything. It's not. So
that's right.
Yeah. So that in South Africa, there's been I know it's saying Cape Town, there's been a massive drought sort of thing.
Yeah.
Like, and I know, say, you've had in the last 6 months, and I've been going through Classic Colours, there's been a whole water element hydration thing going on, and I know when a population is dehydrated, their cognitive stuff goes down. Is there anything related to that? Or it's just a part of the dis-ease that distracts people?
When you have a drought in an area, does it dampen the spirit? Yes, it does. But it also enhances the spirit in another way. So it's a give and take process. Droughts are natural and unnatural at the same time. There are cycles, natural cycles, where water is redistributed to another place for a few thousand or a few hundred years, and that those stones have contracts for it, those dirt, everything has contracts for that. Then there are the times when forced evolution comes in and creates an unnatural drought. That is more when the consciousness is affected, to answer your question, when you have unnatural enforced long-term droughts used to control and move populations.
Yeah, it's quite fascinating because they've actually got a lot of water resource, and it's, from a government perspective, it looks like there's been quite a bit of mismanagement, obviously, which is the corruption. So
because it started as a British colony, black ops colony. Well, not started; it became a British black ops colony, but it started, via slavery and capturing and all the other stuff they did back then.
Yeah, I know there was the Boer War, which was a suppression of independence in a way, going back to the start of the 20th century.
Even before that, when the Portuguese were battling the British, which were battling the French, who were battling the from Holland and Netherlands, Yeah, because they're all trying to get the trade routes.
Absolutely, yeah, a significant waypoint in shipping.
Right. It was the only way at that point.
yeah.
Cape of Good Hope, yeah.
Horrible way to go, mate. I've seen some videos, but yeah, it's interesting what you're saying about the droughts bring about good as well, because from the perception of, like, my observation of what's gone down there, the people have got really pissed off, and Zuma, the Zulu president that's been there for, 5 or 6 years, he just got ousted for probably someone that's not as good as well. But it was interesting, like, people
there was you got to realize, you got to go back into history. Zumba and another African, there was like 5 African prime ministers that all got ousted in like the last 7 months, and he was just the latest oustering of prime minister in Africa. We see this quite often in history.
Yeah.
When somebody's trying to take over regions, they oust the previous governments forcefully.
Yeah. So there's an underlying theme that's going on related to oligarchical stuff. Yeah.
Right.
Is that related to the De Beers family or Cecil Rhodes stuff?
It's more related to, let's just say, internal deep state conspiracies that were created in the 80s. You've heard of the Chinese ghost cities?
Yes.
There are ghost cities all throughout the African continent, too. Now, these particular ghost cities were built by foreign companies for what was believed to be a 2007 arrival of off-world species and an introduction to our world, because Project Bluebeam was going to have an invasion.
Interesting.
Yeah. There's about 40 of these ghost cities spread throughout Africa.
Okay. Yeah, it's
And
interesting.
then there's all the underground bases too. But
It's actually quite interesting what you're talking about, the technology and stuff. And if you watch the recent Black Panther movie, which
yep, I did.
It's sort of hijacking the Black Panther concept, because I've actually made sure I've put that into some of the themes, like the Lyrian and the cat people, because the Black Panther were a shaman aspect of the Mayans that would perceive time, a bit like the Guardian in the Thor movies that would perceive stuff. I see that guy as the Idris, whatever his name is, who was the gate protector, is like a Black Panther. But the theme I'm sort of bringing up with this Black Panther movie is all the technology. You know, they're using shields and reverse engineering technology and brilliant scientists, you know, isolated from the world.
Yeah. So something you were asking about South Africa, there are a couple other things that I'll bring up. I just want to pull up a map real quick to make sure I'm describing the city right. All right. So Namibia president was removed. South African president was removed. The Mozambique and Zimbabwe presidents were removed, but that was over a period of 2 years. Zambia. So pretty much the lower part of Africa.
Yeah.
Okay. Now, there's a river system. Hold on one second.
It's funny. I've actually got a really good mate from my IT days. He's from Zambia, and he looks like Wesley Snipes, and he's the most brilliant engineer I've ever met. He got sent to China to learn engineering, and he didn't realize he had to learn Chinese at the same time. But he learned it, and did engineering while learning Chinese at the same time. It's crazy. It's like, but I had an interesting interaction with sort of various African people, because in my IT days I used to do a lot of consulting, and one of the places I did consulting for was British Aerospace, BAE, because BAE is massive in Australia. And I went with this guy, the Zambian guy, and he's a good mate. And we met this guy who's from the South African region, and he's from Namibia, but he calls it Rhodesia because he was white. He was in his 50s at the time, so he's from that old school like apartheid region. And Rhodesia used to be like Cecil Rhodes' whole country. So, but it's not called Rhodesia anymore. It's called Namibia. But he called it Rhodesia to my Zambian mate, and they were just like at each other because they knew that it was a race thing. It was really interesting to see that friction, you know.
Yeah.
Because you don't get it. It's like different Asian cultures, like the Vietnamese versus the Thais, and you know the Malaysians versus the Singaporeans. There's all these intricate cultures that have issues and stuff. So it was quite funny because Cecil Rhodes would be someone pretty cool to go into while we're on the South African thing. But you're wanting to explore something, mate. I took you away. Yeah.
So it's as I found the rivers. I think it's the Niger River. Let me make sure. Or maybe it's the South African River.
The Niger is pretty big. It goes up to Kenya, does it?
Well, this is in South Africa.
Okay.
The Orange River. It goes all the way across South Africa. Now, that particular river has a variety of deep underground bases next to it, a large variety, like hundreds and hundreds and hundreds, from all of different parts of the world.
Mm.
And where you have the Congo River that goes through Zambezi, there's another set of underground. These are off-world underground bases, though. Now, the key to the Orange River is Orange River, whatever you want to call it. It connects to the ocean to an internal lake, and that internal lake's an off-world lake too. Well, it has off-world issues. There are their own communities that are there.
Interesting.
Yeah. So that is the mix of what's going on in South African politics.
It's like a how can I describe it? But it's like an interaction between many factions. Like
all the factions are forced to operate down there under the global umbrella of corruption. That's why it's the tip of the spear of corruption. If you want to be a global player on the global narrative and have global technology and influence the global thing, you have to have, a significant entourage and infrastructure in South Africa so that you can make expeditions and communications to the Antarctic communities. Okay? The Arctic communities are impossible for them to get into. The North Pole communities, so they have to go to the Antarctic communities, because that's the access to the great underground and underwater channels that go all over the world.
So what sort of time frame is this underlying thing being in the awareness of society? Is this going back to
tens of thousands of years? It's been like that. Tens of thousands of years.
So what was Cecil Rhodes' role in all this? Because he went and basically took over that whole region from the British side of things.
Well, you got to understand the esoteric communities that were behind him.
Sure.
Right. So he was driven by that, the esoteric communities that were behind him.
So he was like a
He's the point man. He's the point man.
Yeah, a bit like a Christopher Columbus, or the guy that went to Puerto Rico. What was his name?
Not Da Gama. I forgot what you're talking. Yeah, I know what you're talking about. Yeah.
But they're like these, like Lawrence of Arabia type of beings that have a lot of the frontman contracts for taking the karma hits.
That's right.
Yeah. Interesting, right?
Yeah.
Layer.
There's a reason.
Like you look at what's going on in humanity in the surface. The dis-ease of the whole thing is usually underlying a distraction from something pretty big that's going on under the surface of things, so to speak.
That's right.
They've got to create the distraction, so the scale of the distraction represents what's going on.
Yep.
And this is going to be an escalation all over the world. It's increasing. It's the global slapstick.
Yep. Back to the slapstick. I remember saying that to Sean Stone.
Cool, mate.
Big Three Stooges event. No one understood what I was saying in 2013, 2014, and 2015.
I think not many still understand what you're saying now relative to back then.
Nobody thought Trump would come into office in 2016. Even when the was elected, they were still thinking, no way.
How can this be?
Exactly. How can this be?
Yeah, it's always funny how things change, mate. And it's like, I would have never thought it, but we're all, like, one thing that I've really come to appreciate, just like walking through my neighborhoods and stuff, is the only constant is change in this world.
Absolutely.
The only thing you can trust,
yeah.
The only thing you can trust is going to be the same is change.
Mm-hmm. Now, change is relative to the observer too.
Absolutely. Oh. So I guess like there's this time where you're young in a life on humanity, and you want change, you want different things, but then you get to a point where it's like, I could handle a bit less of that shit now, Yeah. Why can't we have it just like it was in the 90s or something like that, You get to that point, and it's fascinating. But the thing is, you've got to accept change, and how do you handle it, and what do you do, and what is there in it for you. And I think for me, it's like the change is always an opportunity to reassess where I'm at, and where I might be stagnant in things that could do with some shift, which is also a fractal like energy in the body, like needing massage and stuff. So it's just, I just got a recent greater appreciation of that constant change, And
the cool thing about change is what you perceive it to be.
Absolutely.
Because it's so true what you said. We are in forever constant change. That's the whole point of being alive.
Yeah. It's like
Sometimes it's okay to be at the plateau of change, or not a lot's going on. It's okay. It's not going to kill you.
Yeah.
Not going to kill you.
So wherever you see division, you're looking at the system, effects of the system. We don't naturally divide ourselves off into religions. That's been forced upon us. We haven't had a human, we haven't lived on the planet as real human beings for tens of thousands of years because of the division and deception and the information that's been removed from the collective and hidden from us. And the way that we've been driven about in fear, we haven't had a chance to actually live as humans. And the only time you ever see the real human characteristics appear is when there's some massive disaster that the government can't handle and everyone steps up and helps the other. Right? When you're looking at that, you're looking at how human beings actually behave. Which gives me a great hope, because that's still in us, and they will never be able to take that away. No matter what programming they do, it'll still come out when we have to step up. And stepping up is what this whole process is all about. You know, 'cause when I first went down this path of getting involved in researching what was going on and starting to communicate with people who were doing the kind of work I'm doing now, I kept getting there's one message that I kept getting, which is to be free, the people must stand. That's what we're talking about. Standing, by standing, I mean maybe a general strike, stop paying the banks and taxes, simply reject the system. That's the stand that we have to take, because as soon as we withdraw our energy from the system, it will just disappear before our eyes. But we have to do it in such great numbers that it has a cascade effect across the planet, and has to be done in a way that's peaceful and preferably joyous.
Would not voting be one of those? Would that apply?
Yes. How could they have a government if no one turned up? That's the thing. What they have to hear are the crickets.
Honestly, there's a better way than not voting. It's rescind your voter registration on a mass scale.
Yes.
Right.
Remember, they do voter registration drives every year for a reason. Need your tacit consent to continue the government in the background, because tacit consent only allows them here in the United States to allow the 505 members of Congress, Senate, and other different branches to function with laws that are already passed. If you begin to remove your voter registration and on a big scale, but your local governments, especially your local governments, say, I do not stand with the way of this method of operation in corporations, and you write a lengthy explanation letter of why you're resigning your right to not your right to vote, your registration to vote, because that is where they get you in the consent part of the government. You know, that can be just as much as a public pain.
Andrew, we must talk about how to do it in this country, because we have we have actually compulsory voting in this country, which is tied to your birth certificate. The fact that you're actually registered in the system. Sorry?
When did they start compulsory voting? In the 60s?
Can't tell you, actually. Not sure when it started.
It was pre-60s. It was the original invention of the corporation. They knew ultimately that voting must be done so that the system of corporations would be accepted subvertly. If it's done in post-60s, the second generation of corporations, where they needed to have voting compulsory because the type of ownership that they had on it. Because you're in Australia, you're defined a different version of cattle. Your commerce, your flesh and blood is commerce. Therefore, the commerce must have a voice, and the voice must be given to them through the system, which is a little different here in the United States, where, here you get once you get your birth certificate, you're considered dead and you tell them you're alive. And that's how they take advantage of you on that basic level. In your country, it's a little different, the way they get you, because your reality was different and they couldn't have a cookie-cutter way.
So do you think, because you said in one of the first series you did with Cosmos, that the Queen holds all the spiritual spiritual contracts of the birth certificates of every
and she actually owns the actual birth certificates too.
Because the Vatican gave it to her in 1863. Was it
1813?
1813. You see, you're so brilliant. 1813, and they basically gave it over to the monarchy. So the Queen actually holds all the birth certificate spiritual contracts from all of us.
And the physical birth certificates. That's what allows the Bank of England to fund the asset-backed currencies, or non-asset-backed fiat currencies from the Bank of International Settlement, which is all interwoven with spiritual contracts. Because the Bank of International Settlement, which was based off of future gold earnings and physical earnings, and the actual physical energies of those that we're going to be putting into the War Powers Act, all into this one national settlement area, and then the corruption started selling it everywhere, selling the debt to whoever they wanted to, because they could literally create money out of thin air.
And then there are 253 corporate governments in our world that use very similar administrative techniques. Not all similar, but example, the country of Australia. Did you know that the actual corporation for Australia, its actual address, physical address, is the embassy in the United States, the Australian embassy in the United States? Their country isn't even owned by them anymore.
I know.
The way your reality in Australia was conquered was very specific, and therefore the system that was created had to be very specific for those local realities to stay in domination and control, and not to spawn independent realities of domination and control that could never talk to each other.
Okay, in that case we would have to literally rescind our our straw man entity to actually...
Well, your citizenship, oddly. It comes down to where your citizenship comes from. Does your citizenship come from a province, or does it come from a local magistrate?
To my awareness, the citizenship actually comes from the birth certificate, from that relationship.
I bet you it doesn't. I bet you that it's been glossed over a few dozen times.
Look, I wouldn't be surprised, because the crap that they've pulled on the Australians in terms of saying one thing and doing another is incredible at that level. What are you thinking it'll be?
I think there are so many places of power. One can reinvest their citizenship into Australia that has no government. That's why. So you could rescind your energetic citizenship and then re-put it to Ayers Rock, or to Dreamtime Lands in Wilpena Pound, or to the oceans that surround the great island of Australia, to the original dominion with the ancestors. And all of a sudden, you no longer are part of the citizenry domination and control system that is the invading force that has conquered Australia as a Dreamtime world. Australia's continent is, let me finish. Australia's a continent is a giant spaceship. It is meant to leave our world and literally land on other worlds to seed life in a brand new world, and seed Dreamtimes in a brand new world. And then it's meant to take off and land back on Earth and then update the life force systems that are in there, because Earth is a life force giving world.
So Australia is actually a continent that could leave this planet.
It's a separate unity consciousness drive continent.
Wow.
It can merge with the continental structures of any other planet in any other environmental status to bring sentient life directly upload, like a USB drive would be plugged into a computer.
Is that why they went after the Aborigines?
Well, the Aborigines are an incredibly resilient people. They have held base here despite everything that's been done to them, and they've literally been in the island of Tasmania. They were genocided. They were wiped out, which tells you what was probably down there. You know, it was a very deliberate act. But in Australia itself, the energetic space for their dream time has been held brilliantly by the elders of, and that's no doubt why is the importance. I mean, I've never heard what Andrew just said. I'm sitting here quietly gobsmacked again about that piece of information.
I've been waiting to deal that one out for a little bit.
Yeah, well, consider it dealt. There's going to be some conversations when I finish the show with people ringing me up saying, "What? Really?" Because one of the conversations I had on the weekend was about Stargate Atlantis, which is one of my favourite aspects of the Stargate series, and the fact that this entire city could actually fly intergalactically, or between stars. And I just love the idea of being able to have a whole city of people moving from planet to planet across the cosmos. And here you are telling me that the country I'm living in could do that. Well, I want to know where the control panel is for that one.
I can't verbally say where the air could cause a rather massive thing. Also, there are a number of other cities that can do the same thing. One in Kiev, one in Moscow, one in Washington, D.C., one in Lipson, South Africa. There are other places that figured out how to create the technology on a city level, and these are called unity consciousness drives, which I've spoken to you about a number of times. And Australia's unity consciousness continent drive system, where its purpose is to phase out of reality, turn into an energy-based vehicle with all the sentience held within its infinite energy system, and then to broadcast itself into the Dreamtime network of Earth, which is connected to our sun, which can then broadcast us to anywhere in the universe, even to places that aren't created yet. And Australia has the very unique ability to go into the uncreated, created part, where it can go deep into the Dreamtime of parts of the universe that aren't created left, and it can seed ideas for our future selves to see even deeper into the future.
It is no wonder that the indigenous here have protected their knowledge for so long.
Correct.
Because they must know that. And
oh yeah.
The things that have been revealed even the last year about their level of knowledge have been quite stunning, and it's not general knowledge yet, even around the alternative community, just how far that goes, and how powerful a group of people they actually are. And what you're putting here is, again, peeling back that next layer of information. And all I can say is, holy crap.
That's right. As everybody's silently giggling over here.
Yeah, I can hear them.
Those holy crap wow moments a few times here.
Yeah.
Followed up by, you can't make this shit up.
Exactly. Exactly. Well, it actually feels, this information has a feeling to it, and if it resonates, it really does resonate. And what you're describing, would it be a situation where the continent would physically disappear off the planet, or is that all what you're describing really happening etherically?
It can do all of the above. It all depends on the type of mission that the continent is going. If it's going to let's say, a world that is near death, because Earth can adopt a species of another world temporarily or permanently, and it can send a part of itself, which would be Australia, to go and be the rapid response emergency rescue system to a world that's in dire straits of destruction. And it can act as the emergency system to mass create refuge systems that can land in Australia and then be instantly teleported out while the actual continent of Australia isn't being affected by the destruction of that world. Or it can physically meld itself with the world while still being here on Earth, much like I've said about certain mountains in our world that can be multidimensionally exist on thousands of worlds at once and create a permanent or temporary portal between the two worlds, or it can physically leave Earth and have only water in replacement to it, and then turn into an energy vehicle and go to any part of the universe as part of a massiveness consciousness exploration vehicle that has ambassadors from tens of thousands of other worlds who are willing to put themselves into this consciousness exploration vehicle to resolve some great issues, because it's a massive ambassadorial remedy complex in multidimensional dream worlds. I don't know how else to describe it. It has many, many purposes. And it is also a tool of war, too. I mean,
when was the last time it left?
About 1706, 1705. That's when the last opportunity of the elders there were able to do their special Dreamtime dance, in which they were able to eliminate some of the control room aspects and send off the main control room features into the Dreamtime, so the conquering forces of the British Empire weren't able to gain access to the actual control systems of the Unity Consciousness Drive.
So that action actually kept them from being completely dominated, and the continent from being completely dominated.
Correct. Before that, the last time it physically left would have been about 31,000 BC, and it didn't really return to about 22,000 BC. But ironically, because of the Time Wars, it was ripped out of its mission and put back into place numerous times. So 31,000, that's the roughest dates that I can tell you, but it did leave. And when it was forced back and then left and forced back and all that other stuff that goes on with it, it's just a giant hairball.
If the continent actually left and the oceans flowed back in, would that not affect ocean levels around the planet?
Correct, it would. It'd be like taking an ice cube out of a cup. But part of the control system of Earth would allow the planet to leave, the continent to leave in such a way that it wouldn't cause massive disaster. It would be something that would be equivalent to double the high tide.
Yep. Or double the low tide, as it were.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah, look, wow. There's another movie script right there. In fact, several movies. Amazing.
TV series.
Yeah, yep. Whole TV series right there. As you said, you can't make this shit up. It's amazing. It actually ties in well with the general view of the indigenous in this country, that they are protecting something.
Oh yeah.
Isn't there like a famous monument or a famous rock, and people talk about how that's spiritual essence or something like that? I don't know what it's called, but it's a famous
it's called rock, or its real name is Uluru, and it's a sacred place. I mean, what I know of it is as a sacred place. It's an energy vortex. It's part of their dream time, and it's no doubt involved in the process that Andrew's talking about at some point. It's a pretty obvious thing when you look at it, but it's a very large rocky rock, essentially. It's part of a mountain range or a rift that's at a very oblique angle, and it's just poking out of the ground quite literally, but it's connected very deep into the earth from where it is. And the land around it is incredibly flat, so it really stands out, and it's a deep, dark red. It's a beautiful place. I actually went there when I was about 12, 13, and at that time there was really no control on what the tourists could do, so I walked up it and around it and through all some really beautiful rock formations in and around the base of it, and it's really, really an amazing place from every respect. These days it's actually run by the community, the Aboriginal community, and a lot of it is inaccessible, which is appropriate because it is one of their sacred places. In fact, don't know if they've necessarily done it. Walking up the rock is a real experience, and it's way more limited than it used to be. And I have a feeling that you actually can't even do it anymore, but don't quote me on that one because I'm not 100% sure. But even just to observe it and walk around it is a really interesting experience, and it obviously is part of the heritage and the secret of the Aboriginal community, because they're far, far better organised than I was taught at school, I've come to realise, because they are actually inherently telepathic. They were operating literally as one community, always. And that has been lost to a fair degree by all the interference from the times that since white man has turned up to dominate the land. Right. But they still have it. It's still in place. They still have that.
Well, there's a little bit more I want to talk about Australia, Japan, and Greenland. Those are the main places where the storehouse of the defensive weapons of Fortress Earth are destroyed. Remember I was describing you earlier that the etheric broadcasting satellite system has a way of pulling a large volume of other reserves out of the timelines? Well, Earth also has that built inside its Fortress system, and Australia, Greenland, and Japan are those places for those out-of-phase storehouses that can return defensive consciousness first-strike weapons or counter first-strike weapons to prevent reality-busting concepts. Because essentially what we're doing inside this matrix right now is cracking the facade of the realities that are to give us belief structures. And there's 5 layers of facades. You have the patriot programming, you have your citizen programming, you have your spiritual programming, you have your monetary programming, and then you have the fundamental people that understand there's 5 facades. And for you to choose one is the choice of the system that's telling you. For you to say that I go to the original programming is to engage your sovereign free will and understand that you need not to accept any of the facades of reality. And you can get to the original rules of this reality separate of whatever cultures are living on it. And those are known as consciousness defensive or first strike weaponry systems. And that's what Australia, Japan, and Greenland are about. People can occupy those places and have psychically connected to those defensive or weaponry systems that exist there and can quite literally prevent timeline incursions. That's why Greenland is covered in ice. That's why Australia was dominated and controlled the way it was, and that's why Japan tried to hold out for as long as it could until finally the system cracked it and it was forced to be open. And then all of a sudden the drugs and the greed flowed in, and what flew out of Japan was the technology of consciousness exploration, but it had already been subverted long ago, and the Japanese people really had no idea how much it was subverted before, because the way the sacred feminine was so intricately, surgically dissected into the most basic essence of what it is, so it had no power. And that's the most devious, subtle plan of all, of how that programming spread to the world.
We have quite the mess to unpick.
Yep, and it's going to require people like Carlos to figure out what part of it they want to explain to others. I mean, Chris, you've been out this with me since May the 19th, since the first Walking an Energy show. I've been doing this since October last year, trying to explain the entire system from every angle that I could. Let me say something. The 7 wisdoms of the universe are already in archives. All right? Everything that we need to know to free our world is in just my adventures in reality shows. The Walking and Energy shows is me explaining the system. So for those of us out there that don't want to deal with religion or spirituality and want to get to the basic fundamental rules of our reality, here's what you need to know. And it'll be your free will discernment from your own heart space to determine how you want to challenge the reality with your belief system in flux.
So over the many years, I've had all varieties of people come to me, business professionals, spiritual teachers, sports personalities. And I want to share a story with you. Now, a little over 2 years ago, I was in a session and I had a gentleman communicate to me. And this gentleman was a trainer for a hockey team in the United States. Now, he had traveled around the world and he had studied Chinese medicine, he had studied massage therapy and a variety of other things that directly applied to the injuries or the wounds or the damage that would occur just from playing hockey. And this gentleman was an outstanding healer, but he wanted to get to his next level. And he knew that his job, which he loved and gave him a great source of income and travel, was its own limitation. Though they did allow some form of alternative therapies in there, there was a direct, hard cutoff line. And this gentleman had a hard time removing that cutoff line from him so that he could go to the next level. Now, over a handful of handful of sessions, I helped him create the recipe of ceremonies that separated ultimately his medical work from his spiritual medical work. And I use these two worms and I combine them because I see him as a spiritual doctor, one that not only sees the physical wounds of repetitive workouts and injuries that come, but the spiritual wounds that are behind them, forcing oneself to evolve over and over again. And this was a common theme in many of the personalities that he treated in the hockey industry. So they were forcing themselves to get more muscle, to build more strength, and not acknowledging what else was going on there. So we had this long conversation that talked about the fascia in the muscles. Now, the fascia is what connects the muscles. It's the webbing around the muscles. It ultimately determines how the muscles are compacted or retracted and open or closed and how much fluid's in there and how much pain you have on the muscle. So he went deep into understanding the fascia. And he took cranial sacral and a variety of other myofascial release stuff. And I said to him one day, you have to cross that line. What you do in your private practice when the season is out and the miracles that you create, you can directly have them. You simply needed to ask those that are working. And there was a particular gentleman that he was training and working with that had a knee injury, and the knee injury needed surgery, and the fascia around there were horribly affected. And he went into that, and he was able to get that gentleman 3 months early from his injury, back to being on the hockey team, back to being the professional that he was. And he found himself at the end of that season wanting to be hired by another team and another team, until suddenly there was this contract offer between several teams that wanted him there. And it wasn't just because of having one person get back. It was the way he implemented the science of the fascia, explained it to the people, the teams, so that healing could occur at a faster rate. It was within those ceremonies that I helped them to describe that created the language to talk to people that were in science of medicine, so that the passion of the spirituality converts directly and translates to those beings you're trying to communicate to. Those are some of the examples of how ceremony helps you at the higher level to define the manifestation of what you need in your life. And another story I'd like to bring up is business professionals. A lawyer, I've had many, many lawyers come to me that have their own group of spiritual issues. But in this story, it was very similar to the gentleman from hockey. He was trying to, how do I put this? Bring what was lawyer knowledge and what was spiritual knowledge to a group of clients to create an investment group. Now, this isn't about courts, it's about creating the investment group and bringing in fourth density personalities, fourth density ideologies, and to literally create a company from the lawyer level, ground up, that reflected a greater community view. Now, he had a tough time pitching this to other lawyers, tough time pitching this to other professionals. until I helped him understand he had to not pitch it and sell it to not but himself, but to the universe. The universe is waiting for his mystical experience. And it was about helping him convert what was lawyer knowledge and put him in a spiritual court of equity with all of his ancestors present, so every aspect of this ideology that he was creating could come to direct manifestation through his own voice, through his own continued writings, so that he had a greater reflection of how to actually present it to third density minds who know they want to do good, but were just unable to see beyond their unknown areas. That is their limitation. And when he began to tackle the limitation of what he was looking at as people, investors, he was able to create the finance that he needed. He was able to create a company that has products, that is now leading in the industry of these companies that are saying, I am going to create companies and buy companies that are existing and begin to change the culture within. You know, we see this at Google and all sorts of other places where they have, you know, workout places, meditation, people that come because they want employee health. Employee spiritual health is just as important. Giving them the time and space to practice their own without judgment or hindrance or scorn from anyone within it. This lawyer was able to create rules, policies, procedures, and documents so everyone can see that's coming in and out of the company as a legacy what the vision of its creators meant are. Now, spiritual teachers, they go through the same thing. From a variety of teachers from all over the world have come to see me, not because they weren't able to do their work, it's because they wanted to get to the next level. And that their own students around them were locked into position, not giving away their power to the guru or the teacher, but stuck, not because of the limitation of the teachings, because the next level wasn't explored. And I want to share a small story about equal co-creation. Now, I was a teacher from Germany who leads spiritual retreats all over the world, spiritual journeying, shamanic understanding, leads ayahuasca ceremonies nonstop. And for this individual being, it was about getting to the next level of how you can combine the master students, the master teachers, into a form of dream sharing. And this came down to the words equal co-creation, non-competition, non-hierarchical order, something that's throughout the Living the Mystical Life Daily online course. In equal co-creation, non-competition, non-hierarchical order, the student and the master sit in the same seat with equal strength, sharing their unseen and seen worlds' knowingness and unknowingness, going on the same journey, no one greater than the other. When he began to make these applications of equal co-creation, non-competition, non-hierarchical order, the students and the masters discovered non-duality, non-separation, that they were I am living dream beings now and were able to share their mystical experience in their tight-knit group. This is something else that has been practiced since the dawn of spiritual creations. Equal co-creation, non-competition, non-hierarchical order, non-duality, non-separation. You could make that your own mantra to help affect your programs of self-defeat. You can use that as your own mantra to create the sacred space. You can use that in any way, shape, or form that helps eliminate charge or polarity. But then there are times you must use equal co-creation to look at charge and polarity and to actually dive into it and say, where does this exist within me? For an equal co-creation means the spirit and the unknown and the seen and the unseen world are working with you, and every shovel full of self-dirt you're coming up until you find where that program of self-defeat was and why it had some form of influence, charge, and polarity during your joy of prayer.
Each different bubble of reality is true.
A galactic historian is a person
that looks at all the lines of dramatic karma.
Nudge, nudge. It's the Holy Grail.
Improvise. Mysterious.
It's counter psychic intelligence.
Why is DNA farming of this star cluster so important?
Because we do manifest our reality. We do create our reality.